have all these beautiful, iconic landscapes, and we also know that it's an arid place. And that drives the hydrology that we see here. So, you know, we've been busy over the last century engineering rivers and having, you know, rapid population growth in the area, and that has a huge impact on the rivers. Plus, we're also seeing huge impacts from climate patterns. So, you know, why we're here tonight to talk about snowpack and climate change. So why do we care? What's so important about snowpack? Why are people so passionate about it? And why are we sitting here tonight? Any thoughts? Any ideas?
Because we need the water.
We do need the water. We definitely need the water. And we need the water for lots of reasons. So here in the Colorado River Basin, we've got growing demands. We've got lots of people moving here because it's a great place to live and we love it. And then we have decreasing supply. So we're seeing less and less water in the river. And it's causing all sorts of trouble as, you know, we look at the system and the trends that are occurring. So snowpack is essential for the water supply, and our water supply all comes in the west, and here in Colorado in particular, in the late fall and in the early spring through the snowpack. It's essential to creating the healthy flowing rivers. It supports recreation that we all enjoy, so not just skiing in the winter, but also being on the river in the summer, fishing, boating, any of that. And that drives tourism as well as habitat for thousands of species. In addition, the communities also rely on this, and Kelly can speak to this. We rely on snowpack to fill reservoirs, to supply cities and towns, and also to provide water for agriculture. But it's not just the amount of snowpack that we have that is critical. It's also the type of precipitation we're receiving, especially in the winter, whether we're getting rain or snow, and then also the time that it's melting. And we're seeing changes to that, and that's really critical. So in the last 50 years, Colorado has seen greater amounts of precipitation as rainfall as opposed to snowfall, and then snowmelt and subsequent peak flows have shifted by weeks. So we're already seeing those changes. The other thing that happens is even this beautiful healthy snowpack that we have right now, other factors can eat away at it. So even when it's good, you get a lot of wind. The wind causes greater evaporation. We call it sublimation when it goes from a solid to a gas. But basically, it's eating away at the snow, and warm winds melt it. We also see just greater evaporation from higher temperatures. You know that more water evaporates in the summer than in the winter because those higher temperatures drive that moisture out of the snow. And then soil moisture is another critical factor. So last year was a very dry year here, and so all this snowpack, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to soak into the ground and make the soil wet before it starts running into rivers and streams. Oh, and here's just a fun graphic, courtesy of Denver Water. I do have to point out that they have a halo on the good and horns on the bad. And just as a graphic, I just thought it was helpful that even with the same amount of snowpack, you have other factors driving how much water actually ends up in the river. All right, so let's talk climate change, and let's talk about temperature changes we've already seen. So between 1977 and 2006, Colorado has already warmed by 2 degrees. That's already happened. 2015, 16, 17, and 18 were in the top 8 hottest years since 1900. So, you know, things are warm. The climate models project that Colorado is going to warm another 2.5 degrees by 2025, and then 4 degrees by 2050, relative to a 1905-1999 baseline. So that's concerning, and even if we stopped greenhouse gas emissions at the level they're at now and just kept them stable, we would still see temperature increases. So we're not quite there yet, so I think we can expect that things are going to warm. You know, we've also seen how does this impact us? So the average snowpack has declined between 15 and 30% across the west. So those are not just Colorado numbers, but those are across the west. But it's also interesting where it's declined the most and where it's declined the least. So you see much greater decline at lower elevations, so the snow is not even, it's coming as rain, you're not getting snow, or it's melting faster. Colorado does better because above like 8,000 feet is sort of considered higher elevation. So we're seeing less of a decline in Colorado, but we're still seeing 10 to 20% declines. So those are pretty significant. Yes?
Is that evaporation or something else?
So it's a couple of things. So there's precipitation that's coming, but it's coming in the form of rain as opposed to snow.
Okay.
And then the increasing temperatures are driving the greater evaporation. And then we're also going to, I'll get to it in a few seconds, there's a few other things that drive some of the increasing, the shrinking of the snowpack too. So well, we'll just talk about it now. So dust on snow is another phenomenon. It's not so much local to this particular area, but we're seeing it in a lot of the rest of Colorado, where you're getting these windstorms and dust from Utah, and it's causing this like layer of dust on the snow, and that increases the temperature, and it doesn't matter where in the snowpack it is. If you have it in there, it'll increase the speed at which it runs off and which it evaporates. So this has impacted runoff, and one of the recent studies I have out on this from my Colorado State University researcher Brad Udall and his colleague Jonathan Overpeck from New Mexico, they have calculated that on average the flows between 2000 and 2014 were 19% below the 1906 to 1909 average. And not just were the flows lower, they've attributed a third of the reduction in flows to increase in temperatures. So in prior droughts, what we were seeing was lack of precipitation, so the snow just didn't come at all. But now we're seeing less water make it into the river because of the impacts of the heat. Also, water demands goes up when it's hot. So people use more water when it's warm, and municipal demands are expected to increase from up to 8%, and across Colorado that would translate to 1 million acre-feet. 1 acre-foot of water is enough water to cover an acre and a foot of water, but it's about 350,000 gallons. It's also enough water for 2 households for a year on average. So that's a huge amount of water. And then it has huge impacts to agriculture as well. So plants need more water when it's hot and when it's dry. And the anticipated increase for agriculture is expected to be between 8 and 26% on the west slope due to temperatures. So those are some sobering numbers when you've got less runoff. We talked about dust on snow. A dense forest can help the snowpack, so it can shade, it can slow down the runoff. And conversely, if you've lost forest, you'll get a higher impact to the runoff and to the loss in the snowpack. We've also seen increased fire risk. I think last year was a good illustration. There were fires here in the Yampa. There were also some horrible fires in the southwest part of the state where it was much hotter and drier than it was here. And there's just a lot of fuel out there. There's hot, dry ground, and there's less water, and so you have this combination that drives a huge amount of fire risk. The state of Colorado spent approximately $40 million fighting fires last year, and the U.S. Forest Service spent $120 million, which is 3 times what they spent the year prior. And then that has impacts even now. So the burn scar creates a flooding risk, and there's all this debris and water running through that burn scar, and it pushes all the debris into the river. And not only does it pollute it with like ash and rock, logs, and other things, it kills fish, and it creates water quality problems, and then the municipalities have to treat it to clean it up. So it's a huge impact, and I think we're seeing a lot of that. Puerto Rico has been dealing with a lot of that in the last 12 months. Okay. All right, so pretty graphs and pictures, because you can't do anything about snowpack without talking about this. This is just to give you a temperature graph to talk about where we're seeing that 2 degrees of warming for Colorado and where it's projected. It's pretty sobering, I think. And here is our Colorado April 1 snow water equivalent, which is, as it says, the amount of water that you can expect to see from the snow. And I think what's interesting to look at is if you look at that line of 100%, which is the median, in the last 21 years, you've got 16 years below that and only 5 above it. So that's definitely the trend. We're hoping 2019 might be above it. But again, it's that long-term trend that we need to be focused on. Okay, so local conditions. So you guys can probably speak to this better than I can. You know, let's talk about last year and then we'll talk about this year. So last year, this area of the state and the Yampa Basin did the best out of the whole of Colorado. The snowpack wasn't terrible, it was 89%. And you know, other parts of the state were below 50 and really hurting. But we still saw a lot of impacts. So the runoff was not that good, so our stream flow was only 61%. There was very little rain, it was very warm, and it was, you know, that had an impact on the amount of water that actually went into the river. And then not only was the flow low, but it was also warm. And Kelly will speak more to that, so I won't get into all that, but it makes the fish very unhappy. And then you end up with river closures and, you know, no recreation, and you can't enjoy the river. And the Yampa also had its very first call on the river, which is really just talking about when the state engineer has to step in and administer water rights based on their priorities. So older water rights are better, newer water rights are not as good, and the older water rights get their water first, and the newer ones have to wait. And so, you know, that was the very first time the Yampa had ever been in a situation where the state engineer had to step in and administer all those.
You answered my question.
Okay, okay. So, you know, that's historic for this region to have that happen. Now, this year, things are looking a lot better. We're a lot happier this year. So the snowpack right now is 125%. Conversely to last year, this basin is the lowest in the state on snowpack, but the rest of the state is doing amazing also. We need updated stream flow projections because I think that 105% will go up, but we'll see what happens. March has been very good for snowpack across the state. All right, so now what does this all mean for drought? So we've talked about runoff, we've talked about it happening earlier, but runoff totals are a function of climate as opposed to just weather. So it's not just did it snow this season, but how dry is the ground, you know, what are we seeing? And then we've talked about, you know, the fact that we're getting more rain, we're getting less snow, and then we're seeing just generally things dry out. And it's gotten to the point now where climate change is causing so much drought that we're starting to talk about things becoming more arid and calling it aridification, which is not a great word. We need to come up with a better word. But it's that there's not going to be a return to what people consider the normal. It's that we're going to see things continually to become more dry, and what are we going to do about it? And so, you know, the drought is sort of an indication of water scarcity. And, you know, I'm going to run through a series of pictures after this slide to show you that, and including some side-by-side. But even as snowpack is good, you can still have issues with drought because it takes so long for things to recover out of drought. So, you know, right now for the upper Colorado Basin, which is all the 4 states, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, the snowpack's at 138%, which is amazing. But stream flow is still only projected to be 92%, which just kind of puts you at that average year. And one good winter is not going to be enough. You know, it takes a long time to get out of it. And we'll talk more about the big picture on the Colorado Basin right at the end. I'm just going to touch on that though. All right, so let's talk about snow and what it's looked like. So these are numbers for this year, and I'm just going to give you some quick month-by-month shots. So that was October. There was no snow, basically. It was the very beginning of the water year. The water year starts October 1st, runs through September 30th. November, obviously it's very early in the season, but we like what we're seeing. Blue is good, red is bad. And then we have December. We're starting to see good snow. The southwest corner you can see is still really suffering. This map, just to orient you, is organized by river basins if you're not used to looking at it. So Yampa and White up in the corner, and then the other ones are labeled, but yeah, that's how it's set up. January 2nd, we're seeing better distribution across the state, but still that southwest corner where the worst drought was last year is still really below normal. February 1st, now it's starting to look more like an average year, but again, yellow in that southwest corner. And then by March 1st, it's starting to look good, but it didn't really get really good until later in March. So this is as of yesterday, and it's a much prettier map than it was early in the season. So that's snowpack looking good. Let's take a look, and here's the snow tell. So this graph just shows you, it's just a representation of, you know, the amount of snow, water equivalent at various sites around Colorado. The black line is this year. The purple line, almost at the bottom, was last year. So this is stream flow. We talked about this, and even though our snowpack is still really good, our stream flow is only about normal. This is the drought monitor. So these slides track the snowpack slides that we saw. So at the start of the water year, you're seeing that, you know, again, red is bad, white is about as good as it gets. You know, even that orange color in the middle is severe drought. So the heavy red and the very dark red are extreme and exceptional drought. And as we move through the year, even though the snowpack's getting good, we're still seeing a lot of drought across the state. And here we are in February, and even though the drought is reduced, we've still got most of the state in a drought condition, and half of it, well, 40% of it in the severe to exceptional drought.
Is that drought like relative to normal, or is it just drought because we're always in a drought?
It's drought relative to normal.
Okay.
It's not that we're always in a drought.
Okay.
It's abnormally dry and drought for Colorado.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And then March 5th, it started to look much better. And then this is the most recent chart where we actually see the state as a whole is really moved out of drought. So it took until we had snowpack at 150%, 140 statewide average, but very high in those southwest corners before we really saw it come out of drought. And then I just put some of them side by side so you could see. So this is as of February. So as of February, we've got good snowpack. We've still got really bad drought. This is March 5th. And then just because it makes us feel better, this is the most recent one.
So why are we still in a drought in parts of Colorado when there's high snowpack? What causes that?
So the soil is still really dry, and so what's happening is everything has to get soaking wet, and before there'll be any water that'll run into the river. So yeah, so it's just, there's a delay in the recovery. So now I'm just going to quickly turn to the Colorado River Basin as a whole. So this is just an overview map, so you can see the upper basin with Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico, and then the lower basin with Arizona, California, Nevada. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this because, you know, I know you're here in the Yampa, but it does illustrate sort of what's happening on the whole system. And I think, you know, the shortages, the declines that we're seeing at Lake Powell, which is that reservoir that you've probably all heard of, sorry, and it's right on the Arizona border there. That's, you know, the main reservoir for all the upper basin states. So right now, Lake Powell is 38% full. And that's a reflection of all those snow water equivalent years we saw over the last 20 years that were below normal. So, you know, the water's just not getting down there. Plus there's how much water's going out is another part of that equation. The snowpack, again, as I mentioned, for the whole upper basin is at 138%, and we're only going to see inflow of that 92%. So, you know, we're going to have a normal year for Lake Powell. It's going to go up a little bit, but it's not going to go up a lot. So it would take an awful lot of wet years for that reservoir to really recover, given our current, you know, actions. In 2018, the inflow was 43% of normal, and it was the third driest year on record. And so as the forecasts were coming in last year, they just kept revising them down and revising them down. And Lake Mead, which is the other reservoir, that really helps the lower basin states of California, Nevada, and Arizona, it's 41% full. So system-wide, things are not looking great. For comprehensive overview on Colorado River issues, there is a State of the River with the Colorado River District and the Yampa Lake Green Basin Roundtable that's happening on April 3rd. So put that in your calendars too. And then here's just another, it's a similar graph, but it's different. This is inflow into Lake Powell. And again, over the last 20 years, you're seeing how many years are below the average, including 2002, which was the worst year on records, and 2012 and 2013, which were the worst combination years. And I think we're actually going to hold questions to the end. So I'm going to skip over this slide and turn it over to Kelly, who's here to talk about river health. Thank you. So again, my name's Kelly Romero-Heath, and I am the Water Resources Manager for the City of Steamboat Springs. So I want to start tonight by talking with you all about what it means to have a free-flowing river flowing through our community. Free-flowing is not a precise term. As most of you probably know, we do have dams on the main stem of the Yampa. We've got Stagecoach, we've got Yamcolo, we've got dams on the tributaries, Fish Creek, Elkhead downstream, Steamboat Lake. So it's not that we are entirely an undammed river, but we do have a relatively free-flowing river in that those storage projects are relatively small compared to what you see in other basins. So the flows from the Yampa are relatively natural. But really, to depict what it means to have a free-flowing river, I want to show you what it means to not have a free-flowing river. How many of you are familiar with the Fraser River or have been there? Great, right? Famous trout fishing stream in Colorado, over in Grand County. The Fraser River has been heavily depleted of its flow. 60% of its native flow is diverted to the Front Range via pipelines and pumps and tunnels, and and Denver Water is still entitled to an additional amount out of that basin. And environmental groups and Grand County residents recognize that the river was in trouble, right? The Fraser River is so depleted of flow that in the summer, when it's not peak runoff in the summer, it can't access its full channel. And they realize that it never will because so much of the flow is depleted. So environmental groups, Grand County residents, a bunch of partners entered into an agreement with Denver Water, Colorado River District, and other folks, an agreement called Learning by Doing. And one of the projects that they agreed to do was to reconstruct the channel of the Fraser River, basically turning it into a creek, because they would never have the native flow there again. So that's not a free-flowing river. Contrast that with the Yampa River, right? Who was here in 2011? Yeah. So the Yampa River gets to flood, right? We have these extremes. And we don't have a big storage project upstream that's taking that flow. So we are in the fortunate position that the Yampa River gets to overflow its banks and engage with its floodplain. And one thing I love about this picture is you can see, if you can orient yourself here, there's River Road kind of in the bottom and the bridge there.
and you look upstream from there, those are all lands that are conserved in open space. City-owned lands, the Williams parcel, Rotary, our well fields are there, and as you move on up, it goes up to the Legacy Ranch area. And because those lands have been conserved, the river has been allowed to engage with its floodplain. If you look downstream at the very corner of this picture, you can almost see kind of the white rapids as the river gets constricted there below the bridge. You can imagine if we didn't have that floodplain protected, all of that energy would just get focused right onto downtown. Because of this, you didn't hear about the catastrophic flood event of Steamboat Springs in 2011, right? But it's one of the great things about having a free-flowing river. So what does that look like in terms of snowpack? And Orla already showed you a figure like this and explained what snow water equivalency is. It's basically how much water's in the snow up in the high country. And the black line, of course, is where we're at, which is awesome, right? We're happy for that. The brown line at the top is 2011, so you can see there's a lot of snow up there. Green line's average, or mean, and the pink lines on the bottom are 2 years, 2002 and 2012. So we see is, yeah, we are familiar with extreme snowpack in this basin. So there we go. The next year, 2011, we had the 2012 drought year, and in that year, we saw the river peak by April 30th, which I want to say that might have been the first time that had ever happened. And then it just continued to taper, and by July we were looking at flows of almost 45 CFS, which, to put that in perspective, on an average year our river doesn't dip below 100 CFS. So we knew the river was in trouble. And fortunately, there was an organization called the Colorado Water Trust that stepped in to save the day. They raised a lot of money, and they went and made a deal with Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, who owns Stagecoach Reservoir, and they made a deal to have water released to the in-stream flow, and I won't get into water rights too much and how that works, but they were able to restore the flows in the Yampa and bump it up to around 80-85 CFS, which not only helped preserve the aquatic life, particularly the native whitefish, which had been really hammered back in 2002 when the river dropped down to 17 CFS. It also helped to provide some additional flows for the recreational community, the river recreational community in Steamboat. The Water Trust stepped in, continued to help our community year after year, but eventually they came to us and said, you need to come up with a locally driven, sustainable plan to address these restoration of these base flows. So then a couple good things happened. Actually, no, let me start with one bad thing that happened. So 2012 was the year that put our segment of the Yampa on the EPA's impaired water body list for stream temperature. Now it's a little tricky to understand because the way that the EPA regulates stream standards for temperature, it's kind of like a set standard, and you know, it doesn't always count for the seasonal, the natural variability, but regardless, we had some really hot temperatures on the Yampa in 2016. And it really motivated us to figure out, okay, what the heck is happening here on the Yampa when it comes to stream temperature. Around that same time, the governor of Colorado, Hickenlooper, asked the Colorado Water Conservation Board to develop a water plan for the state of Colorado. And that water plan set a goal to put these things called stream management plans in place on 80% of the prioritized streams in Colorado. And stream management plans, and the concept was, okay, take a real holistic approach to looking at river health. Don't just look at water quality, but also look at water quality, your ecology, your hydrology, all of these other factors that go into making a healthy river, and also look at that flow component, because historically flow and water quantity and then water quality and river health have been managed separately. So the city pulled together a team of partners. We raised money. These entities all pitched in to help develop this plan. We really wanted to focus on the reach of the Yampa through Steamboat Springs, starting at the Chuck Lewis State Wildlife Area upstream and ending down at the wastewater treatment facility, the outfall for the city of Steamboat Springs. So first step, we developed a stream health assessment using a method called Backstreet. Our team for this project, we had a consultant team of a planner, a hydrologist, and an ecologist. And our ecologist, Mark Beersley with Ecometrics, has developed this method, which has been used across the state and actually has been used to evaluate the effectiveness of restoration projects on the Front Range after the 2013 floods. But what they did is they took this reach of the Yampa, broke it into segments, and then looked at 10 different variables, 19 different sub-variables that would go into kind of predicting the health of the Yampa through these segments, and then assigned it a grade, like you'd get in school. So the Yampa through town got a report card, and it looked like this. The take home is our river scored around a C plus B minus, which isn't too bad, right? Somebody the other day said to me, like, C's make degrees, or something like that. I don't know, Nathan, maybe your students say that. But so partly why the Yampa scored this way is, so the good thing that the Yampa has going for it is we do have this relatively natural hydrograph, or relatively free-flowing river. So we've got the peaks and we've got the lows, although we don't want them to go too low. And so that's been a great thing that the Yampa has going for it. The other thing is our watershed as a whole is relatively undeveloped. It's mostly national forests and ag lands, and so that has really helped contribute to the health of the Yampa through town. Some of the bad things were river access to the floodplain, kind of upstream from that picture that I showed you, is limited, especially as you get up kind of above the Chuck Lewis, where there were historic gravel mines and levees that really prevent the river from accessing the floodplain on a regular basis. And then we also have a lot of non-native species in our river, especially the northern pike, that are predating on our native whitefish. Then the ugly in this report card is that our riparian community, so the plant community along the riparian forest, has been degraded over 100 years of land use practices. The other piece is the channelization of the river through downtown, so it reduces its resiliency, which basically means our river through town can't respond to big events like floods or fires or whatever it may be. That's because you've got downtown on one side and the railroad on the other, and I was told that two management objectives that are off the tables: we cannot remove downtown and we cannot remove the railroad. And then the other piece is that the Yampa River, of course, fails to meet water quality standards when it comes to stream temperature in many years. So I mentioned a little bit about the long-term impacts of the aggregate mining there around the Chuck Lewis. You can kind of see the slide to the upper left is from 1968. And I'm sorry, it's cut off a little bit, but can't even remember the date. Anyway, that's in the 2000s there in the other corner. So you can see the river kind of lost its ability to move across its floodplain, and then also lost some of the riparian forest. I mentioned that we can't remove town and the railroad. We've lost a lot of our native riparian vegetation. The photo on the top is a picture of a very healthy riparian forest, and we've got some really great ag land managers that have helped to restore it, helped to protect that. And then the picture below is one of our open space parcels, and over there, kind of by the Rotary Park. Again, it's beautiful and healthy. There is some vegetation, but notice there's no cottonwoods, right? We don't have those tall trees that used to be here on the Yampa upstream from town. Chat a little bit about that. The non-native species, we hate northern pike. And actually, just a little side note about this is I've had to really dive in deep to learn more about the whitefish. And how many of you fly fish or like fly fishing guides or, yeah, right? Like whitefish everybody used to make fun of, right? Like you didn't want to catch catch the whitefish. You always want to catch the trout. Well, I think we need to figure out how to make whitefish sexy again, because they are the natives that we have here. Not the brown trout, not the rainbow trout, but anyway, that aside. So the warm temperature thing was a little bit of a mystery to us, just because there are some unknowns. There are some potential stressors. You know, there was some hypothesizing that perhaps Lake Catamount is driving warm stream temperatures in the Yampa, or maybe it's the hot springs that we have right over here, or maybe it's climate change and warmer temperatures and drought and reduction in flow. So we wanted to understand that a little bit more. So CPW has been collecting continuous temperature data on the Yampa for several years. I think they've got some data going all the way back to 2010. And then the city put in temperature probes on 5 sites along the Yampa and the Elk River. So we've been collecting data since 2016. And then one thing I'm super excited about is that we negotiated a year or so ago with the USGS to have temperature added to the 5th Street gauge, and that's funded by the River District, Mount Warner Water, and the City of Steamboat. And so that's what you're looking at on the left, and that's a new thing. So if you say are going to go out fishing, or you just kind of want to track the river to see what's happening to it when we have these low flow years, you can just, if you have like that flow app, or just go on the USGS site and you can see it in real time. And this is temperature data from July of this year. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but the kind of like the top number is 80 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 27 or so degrees Celsius. So you can see the river got to almost 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which is really hot for fish, for the fish species that live in our river. But fortunately, we did have at least some data. We don't have enough data to develop long-term trends, but we had enough data to put into a model. And so we had this fancy pants hydrologist that came up with this empirical model and did mass balance on Lake Catamount, blah, 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 you know, all that stuff. But what we had asked our fancy pants hydrologist to provide for us was, tell us, what is that target flow? What is the amount of flow that we need going past the 5th Street gauge here in town that'll keep our river healthy? And he came back to us and said, yeah, it doesn't work that way. And instead gave us the charts of fire, which basically is a probability of exceedance of the state stream standard chart, which shows us how much water would we have to be releasing out of Stagecoach Reservoir to guarantee that we would meet the state stream standard. And what the chart of fire told us was that the flow rates needed to maintain the state stream standard 100% of the time would be 600 CFS coming out of Stagecoach Reservoir in August. Not only is that like impossible, probably hydrologically impossible, sending 600 CFS through town in July and August is going to send some tubers down to Craig, right? and who knows what else could happen to the river. So exposing the river to those, you know, abnormally high flows would be detrimental. We did find, however, that small releases of reservoir water that help to maintain a flow of around 100 CFS really provides an optimal benefit. We can't guarantee that we're going to meet the state stream standard, but we can start to get closer and really start to draw that temperature down to help our aquatic life. But here's the coolest part of this story is that, and I know it's a little hard to see, especially if you're in the back of the room, but this graph here on the right, the blue line is the baseline, the red line is releases out of Stagecoach to bolster flows, but the green line at the bottom, that shows how much we could reduce temperature with optimal riparian forest restoration. So what does that mean exactly, right? So what the model predicted is that solar radiation is the strongest driver for stream temperature on the Yampa. So if we really want to help to reduce stream temperature, we need to figure out how to shade this river. And this river evolved with shade, right? With the cottonwood forest and gallery that was here. And much of that has been removed over time. So again, what we want is a river that looks more like this picture on the right than what we see more upstream from town. So, what will it take to prepare the Yampa River for climate change? And I want to show you a little video just to illustrate what I'm talking about. Oh shoot, sorry guys. Oh, I wish y'all could hear Bill Chase too. Fire and brimstone when it comes to rivers. It's okay if it doesn't work.
We've been working on this recipe, since about, six.
Started the restoration work we do in the state, and
No, go.
this is the third of 3 phases to make it a healthier system for both the aquatic, for the
I can
fish,
give you the gist.
vertebrates, ducks, waterfowl, and also for upland birds that utilizes healthy riparian shape.
Right, I might need help go back to my slides, Joanne. Oh, we're sorry about that, guys. Thought I was being so clever. And actually, YBSC can better speak for the retreat program than I can, and you're certainly welcome to if you want to be on the spot. No, okay, head's shaking, no. I thought the video would speak for it, but YBSC has had the retreat program in place for 10 years, which is awesome, and it started with tree plantings more on forest lands, but has evolved into tree plantings along the river, in addition to other area, in the uplands as well. And of course, I'd make sure my son made a cameo appearance in the PowerPoint presentation. So anyway, Retreat's been a great program, and so they also coordinate all kinds of volunteer groups, not just cute kids that look good in PowerPoint presentations, but even adults like us. Although you may not make my PowerPoint presentation, no offense. So what we wanted to do was just really infuse that program with the resources it needed to take it to the next level. So again, the city and YBSC and the Colorado State Forest Service partnered. We've done some fundraising. We've raised $175,000 to be spent over the next 3 years, which includes monies from the Colorado Water Conservation Board. The city pitched in $50,000 of its capital improvement project budget, and then also we got $50,000 from a private donor, a very generous private donor, so we're excited about that. And we're going to start that project with a 2 to 3 year plan of planting trees, protecting the young cottonwoods that are already regenerating, but sometimes, even though beavers are great for the river, they also can wreak havoc on juvenile cottonwood trees, and so YVS, or the retreat program, will be building these little cages around the young trees to protect them. And so we'll have a real robust planting, maintenance, and protection and monitoring program in place, starting out primarily on publicly owned lands along this segment of the Yampa. Then that will move into the development of a long-term strategy, a 10 to 20 year strategy, that'll look at the restoration opportunities on private lands as well, moving on up the river, even all the way up to Lake Catamount, and that'll just be based upon which private landowners are willing to participate in this project. And just a note on that, this is really a Johnny Appleseed type project, right? So, especially with cottonwood trees, it takes a long time for them to fully grow, but we have to start now, right? So these are children, our children's children can benefit from that. Another part of the project is looking at securing a sustainable supply of plant materials, our willows, our alders, and especially our cottonwood trees. And so YBSC has been working with the State Forest Service on securing contracts for materials. Also, we may work with Colorado Parks and Wildlife on their existing riparian plant nursery. And we may even explore the concept of building a new, larger riparian plant nursery here in the Yampa Valley. And then a key part of this project is engaging our community members. I mean, the more folks that are getting their hands dirty, planting trees along the river, the more buy-in, the more stake they have in protecting and preserving the health of the Yampa. So YVSC is coordinating a ton of volunteers. We're working with a lot of different groups to help bring folks to their river and to invest in that. So in closing, I got some little statistics here. So the city of Steamboat covers 9.9 square miles of the 7,660 square mile Yampa River watershed, which is 0.13% of the watershed. And the city of Steamboat covers 0.0005% of the 196.9 million square miles on Earth's surface, right? So even though we think we're kind of a big deal, we're really not. So just as like it's not one single entity that can turn the tide of climate change, it's not one single entity in the Yampa Valley that can preserve and restore the health of the Yampa River. It's not just the city, it's not just the county, it's not just CPW or the EPA or Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District. We really have to knit together a team of entities that can start to tackle this project together. And it's interesting kind of looking to the future. I think about managing a free-flowing river like this a lot like rafting a river or rowing a boat. How many of you raft or have rowed a boat, right? So it's kind of like where there are some years, like this year, you could just sort of like prop up your oars, pop open your Modelo or PBR, drink your beer, and you're just kind of cruising through. And there's some years that are a little more challenging, right? So maybe you just have to dip the oar in the water, turn the boat a little bit just to get it going the right direction. And there's some years where you have to power through and throw your lats into the oars to get you through the rapid. But at the end of the day, if you have rigged your boat to flip, you're probably going to be okay. And when it comes to the Yampa River, we don't exactly know what to expect year to year. But we know that if we give the Yampa the ingredients it needs, like conserved lands, flowing water, restored riparian forests, then we've done the best that we can do to at least help our river buffer itself against the impacts of the extremes that we have coming our way. So anyway, with that, thank you all. And
So you talked a lot about what we're doing here in Steamboat in Ralph County. What are the counties downstream from us doing? Because if we do all of these things of planting trees and maintaining floodplains and things, we're doing great for our section of the river. Are others downstream being proper stewards as well?
I think that's a great question. When we took on the stream management plan, we kept it a relatively small reach by design, because this is one of the first stream management plans since the Colorado Water Plan prescribed them. That let's try this out. Steamboat's a pretty easy community to do this in. People are very motivated to preserve the health of the Yampa. And in that, we can kind of maybe develop a template or a framework for how these plans could be developed and implemented on a larger scale. And that is starting to happen. The Yampa White Green Basin Roundtable is working together to develop, they're calling it an integrated water management plan, but they're looking on a much larger scale at things that we can do to really preserve the health of the Yampa beyond just the city of Steamboat Springs. Now, that plan needs to be developed so then we can come up with some implementation dollars and really know where implementation will make the most difference. But I would stay tuned to see how that develops.
You showed a slide of the Fraser River, and I'm just wondering if temperature is the only water quality standard that we're violating right now. If the Front Range is successful
that is a tool that has been very valuable to the other West Slope and mountain communities that have dealt with trans-basin diversions. Is they say, hey, we're not meeting water quality standards. You can't get your 401 certification. Sorry, I'm getting permit wonky with Mike because he knows what I'm talking about. But you're not going to get your permitting if you can't meet those standards. So that is one tool. I will say there are a lot of hurdles that an entity would have to overcome to be able to get a big trans-basin diversion on the Yampa, not the least of which is the depletion of flows going into Lake Powell. So that, I mean, I'm not an expert on the big river issues, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of hurdles that any new trans-mountain diversion is going to have to cover, and even the ones that are already 10, 15 years into the permitting process are really challenged right now. So you're seeing a lot of resistance to some of the projects that are already happening. That, you know, the Denver Water is expanding Gross Reservoir. There was a big hearing with Boulder County Commissioners about that. There's a lot of concern expressed by community groups on that one, even though it's been in the works for 15 years, maybe even longer. The Windy Gap firming project that Northern Water has been trying to get permitted for decades. You know, so I think there are a lot of hurdles for anybody facing that, and we're seeing, you know, these decreased flows over here that, you know, you wonder where the water's going to all come from.
And you better believe if we really do face the threat of a trans-mountain diversion on the Yampa, we are going to be throwing our laps into the oars.
Two questions. I think you said there was a unique call on water recently. It was the first time that it had been a call by an entity that had rights for our water. Who was that call from? And the next question is, if these calls start degrading our water temperature and so on, could that be a way of minimizing those calls from actually happening due to the fact of the degradation of our water?
Don't have the specifics of the call. I could answer that.
Okay, yeah, I don't know who actually.
Yeah.
nominated it, yeah.
So the call happened because basically the Yampa River ran dry below the Lily Park pumps, which are downstream of Maybell, so way down there. At the same time, water was being released out of Elkhead Reservoir for the Endangered Fish Recovery Program. So the fact that the river was dry there meant that reservoir water that was supposed to go to Dinosaur wasn't getting there. So it's actually the agency, the Colorado Division Water Resources Division Engineer, the agency placed the call. So it's not necessarily entities that are placing the call that are depleting the flows and warming the river. Because the reality is, in some cases, if there's a call that happens downstream, it can end up drawing more water down to that place because they cut off all the junior diverters. So it's not a either or kind of scenario.
But one thing that does happen, though, is the people that wanted that water, you know, all of a sudden couldn't get it. So if you were junior, you couldn't divert, so you couldn't necessarily irrigate, you couldn't you couldn't water your crops. There might have been more water in the river for a particular section. But, you know, it has a big impact on the community. And some rivers are constantly under, you know, management like that. You know, if you look at the Rio Grande or the Arkansas, they're dealing with that all the time. And it really affects the community and the people that are relying on that water and expecting it to come. You know.
Other questions?
So what caused the cottonwoods to be gone?
So a combination of things we predict. I think they were largely removed because everything from, of course, town being constructed, old agricultural practices, the gravel pits that I showed the picture of there, a variety of things. The other piece too is once we had the reservoirs in place on the main stem, Catamount in particular, then you didn't see the natural natural flow of sediment and seed, and the natural regeneration of the cottonwood forest as well.
Okay, so it's not like people took them out on purpose because they were unsightly or something. They just kind of happened.
There may be some that take about. I mean, there was somebody.
I'm not saying they're unsightly, but I
No, I know. But there was somebody the other day asked me that question, like why do all the cottonwoods look dead right now? And it's winter. Like, so I think there are some people that think that they're unsightly, or like maybe they're a hazard, because they do fall and drop, or branches fall and whatnot. So, but I don't know that there's people actively removing them. No. Yeah.
What's being done in Denver, Front Range, and kind of statewide to decrease, incentivize less water usage in the area so they aren't trying to divert water?
Yeah, so there's a lot of work, and our organization, Western Resource Advocates, is very involved in urban conservation and what can we do, and promoting land use planning that promotes water conservation, and understanding that. I mean, the statistics for Denver Water, and I'm going to give you some generalizations, but they have reduced their overall water consumption by like something like 20%, while seeing like huge population increases. So they're actually doing a good job on conservation, but they're still growing and they're still seeing, a lot of demands on their system. So Denver Water is very active in promoting conservation. They're very strict on what they tell people about watering in general, and things like that. And then it's up to, there's a myriad of other organizations, of course, on the Front Range that are dealing with people. And I think just awareness around water conservation, and particularly outdoor water use, has some opportunity for greater conservation for sure. It's definitely a focus, and part of the Colorado Water Plan is to look at land use and conservation. That's sort of one of the pillars that is addressed in there. And I think that conversation is definitely happening. So, people are becoming more and more aware of it. And I think, a lot of there's other opportunities too. There's a lot of work being done on water reuse as well, which is another huge opportunity. And there was some legislation passed last year around opening up the number of ways recycled water could be used. It could be, to put it on edible crops and use for toilet flushing, and there's a couple of other bills that went through. So looking at those sorts of things that we can do. Colorado doesn't reuse much of its water at all, unlike other places that use a massive percentage of it. Now, not all of it is reusable, because you have return flows and all that you have to deal with. But there are a lot of opportunities for innovation and greater efficiency and conservation.
So you're talking about the toilet to tap program.
Yeah.
You said it in a nicer way.
Or you can call it direct potable reuse.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the other way to
Rosemary
say
the
it.
other day.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there was some beer and wine made last year out of recycled water.
Oh,